Good morning, everyone. Sorry for being a little bit late. Just couldn't do anything with my beard this morning. It's just all fluffy, which I kind of dig, but it was getting, a little weird. So anyway, it's Sunday, Lord's Day. We're able to come together. Okay, Lord's Day is technically Saturday, but this is when we come together as Christians. So, couple things. I haven't been in this office since Thursday night, Thursday evening. Love it. I've gotten a chance to get a bunch of other things done. I hope y'all have had a wonderful 4th of July as well. Something interesting happened to me on Thursday. Let me adjust this camera a little bit. Sorry, just seems a little bit. There we are. That's better. So some of you may or may not know. I've kind of hinted at it. I don't know how much I've said online or not. Just nothing is where it's supposed to be this morning. I apologize. There we are. So I got asked to do a pilot episode for a potential show. I won't say on what. It was a digital radio thing. I won't say who or what, just for that. But it was a big deal. It has fallen apart behind the scenes for some. Really had very little to do with me, more some other stuff. And that's fine. Honestly, it's going to give me a lot more time to focus on this, which is where I really want to be anyway. But that being said, it was sort of an interesting thing. I'm going to put together, I have the first episode, and I have some recordings of some interviews I did with some people. I'm going to put that all together, and that will go up on Trinity Paracryptid Network. So again, if you know of Texas Front Porch and you know me from there, probably sometime this week or next week, I'll have it up on that channel and we'll advertise it. It'll be fun. But like I said, it was just kind of nice to be told, okay, at least we know where it's going. Like I recorded this episode weeks ago. We've been talking about it for like 3 months, so at least it's done, and I'm happy with that. I really prefer where I'm at. I really like to be able to give this more time. There's still certain things I really want to be able to do, like with Siru Papers, right? I haven't had a chance to even touch that website in months because I had to finish up the book and all these other things. And so I'm going to try and tie Siru into this channel as well, more directly, since this is more of a ministry thing. I want to kind of try and tie all this together so I can maximize my stuff. So we're going to tie a bunch of things together. It's going to be really good, really, really fun. But like I said, interesting last couple of days. I've gotten a lot of things done. I'm having a good, like I said, I haven't been in this office since Thursday night, and I love it. But I'm glad to be here with y'all. So before we get too far forward, let's open with some prayer, and then we will kick into what should be a shorter teaching, but I think it's going to be beneficial, assuming I can avoid any distractions, and that usually never happens anyway. So, oh well. Heavenly Father, we thank you and we praise you for all that you've done. Thank you for the people who are watching both live and who will watch this on replay. Father, thank you for bringing us all together. This is a time of shaking, a time where you are exposing flaws in ourselves, flaws in the world around us, and you are showing us that you are the only thing that can really solve our needs, meet our problems, that it is futile for us to try and fix things with our hands and with our own mind, but that we need to turn to you. Father, we thank you that you don't see the outside of a man, but you see the inside. Thank you that you've given us a way to turn from what is evil and live with what is good. That in you there is no shade or turning, that there is only light, that there's truth. That there is no other Greek or Jew or male or female, there is only slave or free, there is only your children. Father, continue to guide us in the ways in which we should go. Show us how to love those around us. Help us meet the needs of those who are desperately seeking you. Help us and give us the strength to speak the truth, to know when to speak it, to know how to speak it, and to speak it boldly. Father, we pray that the words that we study today and is beneficial, that it guides us, that it gives us more insight in order to please you, in order to meet your requirements of us. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. So, this is sort of part 2 of the Nephilims, right? So we may do a part 3, just kind of depends on where we get with this one. We may even do a sort of a separate episode on text. We've sort of talked about that as well. So where do we leave off? I kind of want to touch on a few things and then answer some questions real quick, and then we'll get into why I think the Rephaim are so important to talk about very specifically and how that affects us even today. So just as a quick recap, so we're all on the same page here, the word Nephilim, or the name, is very specifically referring to giants. It does not mean fallen ones like many have claimed, including Zechariah Sitchin. By the way, if you think Sitchin knows anything about language, about these ancient texts, I assure you he doesn't. Go look at Michael Heiser's work on Sitchin. It is very clear Sitchin was a con man, and that's the most honest thing I can say about him. Sitchin was a con man. Anyway, so what we know is it does not actually mean fallen ones. It means giants. That's why that's very specifically why the translators, the rabbis that translated from Hebrew into Greek when they created the Septuagint, chose the word gigantes, right? They were giants. Interestingly, there is sort of a tiny little message in there as well, because the word gigantes in Greek also means earthborn or from the earth. It is entirely possible that it wasn't just their height, right? So actually, let me take a step back on this. What we have to realize is the Greeks, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, all these different cultures, even the American Indians, the Chinese, it doesn't matter what culture you come from. We sort of look back at history and language and mythology as if you have all these disparate cultures developing all these disparate ideas, and they just happen to have overlap. And that's not what happened. The Bible's very clear that there was a unified culture prior to Babel. Babel occurs, everyone's split out, right? Everyone goes their separate ways. They all had the same root mythology, the same stories, the same ideas. Now, they interpret them then differently, but the roots are there. They grow and they change in these different things as they spread out to fit these new cultures that are being developed, the new mythologies. But the point is, the roots are the same. The characters are all original, right? Oh, well, thank you, MH1953. I actually don't know. I haven't weighed in 2 weeks. I'll be weighing tomorrow, so we'll see what happens. But it's interesting. But the thing that we have to remember is all of these cultures came from one initial mother culture. But God divides languages. He sets new spirits over them because they've rejected Him, as we've already discussed in the past. There are 70. The theory is 70 spirits, and we can talk about that later, that goes over these nations. They all go out and they create these cultures, but there's a root idea in all of them that's all interconnected. So the reason the word giant would have been appealing to the Jewish rabbis when they translated the Septuagint is, yes, giants meaning giant, but also the word earthborn. Well, why was that important? Because the giants were, the Nephilim, originally mixes of human and angel. We've already gone through that argument. So yes, human, angel. They mate. We have the Nephilim offspring, which are giant, but they're earthborn. They're divine. They're semi-divine, but they're born on earth. So there's that connection there. That's why they use that word. We know that. We know that the spirits of the Nephilim are, you know what? I don't know if now that I'm thinking, I don't know if I did talk about that too much, but yes, I think I did. Okay. The spirits of the Nephilim are the demons. And again, the reason they chose the word demon to discuss the Shadim and all these others is that the spirits of the Nephilim are the demons. And in Greek culture, demons were actually good things. They were these disembodied spirits of the golden age, right? These perfect humans who lived in this perfect age. And they would come and bring knowledge and wisdom. And the Hebrews looked at it and said, yeah, that's not what you think they are. So they chose that word very specifically so that the Jews would understand when the Greeks were talking about demons, the Hebrew were like, aha. Those of us who saw Coming to America will get that reference. Anyway, so the thing is, as Moses said, and this is going to answer a question that I got, or at least a comment. The Nephilim were pre-flood. They're destroyed. They become the shades, the demons, and they move on into eternity. Or not eternity, they move on in our world, tormenting us, bringing knowledge, leading people astray, because they don't like us very much. But Moses is very specific to say in Genesis 6 that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, meaning pre-flood, and then later. Now, the question is, how do they come back? One of the arguments that I saw was that the Nephilim could never return, and that the others were unrelated. The argument being that the verse that I quoted in Numbers, where it talks about how the Nephilim were because again, there was only two uses of the word Nephilim, one Genesis 6, the other one in Numbers. Well, here's the thing, right? So the verse I read was Numbers 13:33, where they said, there we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. So the argument here is that since that comes from the bad or the evil report that was given by just some background for those who may not know. So before the Hebrew moved into Levant to reclaim it, right? They sent in spies, and they came back with grapes and pomegranates, showing that that there was a productive land. But then several of the spies, or the majority of the spies, came back with this evil report saying, "Hey, we can't do this. There's too many. They're too advanced. There's giants in there." But yet Caleb and his friend there were like, "Hey, no, this is a land of abundance. God's with us. Let's go take what's ours. God promised it to us. Let's just go do the job and let's take care of this, because look at all the great stuff that's there." So the reports, the thing that made it the one evil was that it was all about pessimism. It was saying we can't possibly do this, so that showed no faith in God. Not that they were lying about what they saw. And just to prove that was the case, that they weren't lying about the giants being in the land, let me take just a few skips back earlier. Also in Numbers 13, so it's the same chapter. And it is discussing, again, just factually, right? This is not the report of the spies, per se. This is them just saying, hey, this is what these guys did. This is where they went. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob, near the entrance of Hamath. And they went up through the south and came to Hebron, Ahiman, Sheshani, and Talmi. The descendants of Anak were there. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zon in Egypt. Now here's the thing. Why are they mentioning the children of Anak? Well, because as it is referenced later, and again, it's there that they came to the valley of Eshol and cut down a branch with one cluster of grapes, and they carried it between two of them on a pole. That's how big these grapes were. They talk about the figs and the pomegranates and everything else. So the fact that the three sons of Anak are mentioned just factually there gets again further down where it says there we saw giants, and then in parentheses, meaning that the author is actually adding that in, saying, hey, just remind, when it talks about the giants, it's the descendants of Anak that we saw earlier in the chapter. That's who they're talking about, because we know that the children of Anak, or the Anakim, are connected to the Rephaim. Put you there. Famous non-photo blue pencil. And why is all that important? Well, because the Rephaim are connected to Og. Og is claimed to have been one of the last of the Rephaim. He is explicitly said to be a giant. The Rephaim, or the Rephites, are also giants. They are of this tribe of giants that existed and seemed to be sort of the mother tribe that all these other giant tribes come out. The Anakim, because again, the sons of Anak, they were of the Rephites, right? Yes, MH 1953. The evil report came back on the 9th of Av, and it is in the 9th of Av. If y'all have not done a study, on the 9th of Av, it's amazing. Basically, terrible things happen on the 9th of Av. And so that is actually a day that I would recommend watching on your calendar, because if a politician comes out and says something on the 9th of Av, or there's an event, usually something's going on. Like, that's sort of a key. God uses specific dates as a way of saying, people, pay attention to this. This is what's happening. And we're going to see more about that once we get into Revelation 12. We're going to spend some time on that. I spent 3 years working on books about the Revelation 12 alignment. So when we get there, we'll spend some time on it. And one of those concepts is that God is absolutely using, he absolutely uses particular dates on the Hebrew calendar to tell us things, to communicate to us. Alan, hey, you're live with us, brother. Good to say hello. He is a friend of ours, and he's doing some great work in Kenya. So say howdy to him. In fact, this is a great opportunity to say that there's a project I'm working on that is sort of unconnected to everything else that I'm talking to some people. I want to try and build it up. I'm hoping to be able to bring it out to y'all soon, but it's going to be definitely go hand in hand with what we're doing here. So stay tuned on that one. And Alan, hello. Thank you for saying howdy to everyone and meeting everyone in person, so to speak. Anyway, so the Rephites were giants. They were seemingly the mother tribe for all of the other Nephilim that we see all throughout the Old Testament. So the question becomes, who are the Rephaim? Where do they come from? Because if all the Nephilim were killed prior to the flood, how did they come back? Because that's the big question. There's a bunch of different thoughts on this. And one is that there was a second incursion, right? Obviously, they were, there are people like Rob Skiba. Rob Skiba, I think is his name. He's actually local. I've never met him. I need to look him up. He would argue that there was a second incursion because Moses said the Nephilim came, right, by the commingling of these angels and the women of earth, and so that continued on past the flood. The problem is the Bible doesn't say that. I mean, it does say that that's how we get Nephilim, but it doesn't say that actually occurred. So that's sort of one mark against it. But does that invalidate the theory? No, it doesn't. And I will tell you, and let me argue for him here in just a second, or for just a second. So one of the arguments against that particular thought is that is that in the Book of Enoch, it expressly talks about the punishment of the watchers that created the Nephilim, and there's a line by Michael who flat out's like, "Whoa, this is kind of harsh." It's like, ain't nobody gonna do this again. This is bad. And so let me actually tell you what happened. So after 500 years, God's like, all right, we're done. Y'all go solve this. And he sends the archangels. There are 7 archangels. He sends them down. Michael restrains the actual Watchers themselves. They watch, as I believe it's Uriel. I may be wrong on that, so don't quote me, but I think it's Uriel. Sends a delusion amongst the Nephilim, and they fight it out. They literally murder each other. Michael makes them watch, because here's the thing: the Watchers loved their children. That's sort of something we often don't understand, is that evil does not always see itself as evil per se, but they were evil. And so Michael actually makes them watch their children murder each other. And then he locks them in Tartarus, which is within Sheol. We've had that discussion, right? Sheol, the land of the dead, is sort of like Chili's, right? There's a land of the righteous dead, which is the non-smoking section. Then you got the smoking section, and inside that smoking section is the bar. Tartarus would be the bar, right? So he locks them there and chains them, as we mentioned in our study on Revelation. That is also when he stands up midway through and he's like, all right, it's time and half times. And he casts Satan down and his angels down from heaven. I think that's also when those scorpions from the pit emerge. I think those locusts, the scorpion locusts, are the Watchers, and that it's Satan who's releasing them, because he's been given the key. Because basically Michael's like, hey, I ain't doing this. I'm done, right? I have ceased to do this job. And so he hands him the key. Now, my beard is weird today. It's just, there's weird weather going on, man. Funny story, then we'll get back onto it. Yesterday, there was this, like the radar had almost, it wasn't perfectly circled, but it was like this tiny little circle of just hellacious weather, and it came right over our house. And we're just sitting there like, what the heck? Like, it was completely clear, and then there's just this one little tiny thundercloud with lightning. It was like we heard it because it was coming from the north. I could see out the south. I'm like, it's bright and sunny. What the heck? There was nothing going on. I took a step out, and it's just this one little hellacious thundercloud, and it's like, and just, it was nuts. But it's kind of all the humidity. My beard's all puffy, weird. Anyway, so it was so bad that Michael's like, no one is going to do this ever again. No one would do this. Not after this event. So people point to that and say, so then clearly there's no more angels coming and mating with human women, creating giants. To that I would say, hold on. Because it wasn't just the creation of the Nephilim that they were punished for. It was the fact that the Watchers stayed there and were worshipped as gods by the humans. That was the thing. They exchanged their knowledge for the wives. That's sort of how they, when they showed up, they're like, hey, give us your women. We'll give you all this knowledge. Ironsmithing, cutting of roots, the stars, the advanced mathematics, all of these things were given to mankind by these Watchers. And they ruled as gods on earth. That was the issue. That's what they were punished for. It wasn't just the creation of the Nephilim. So it is entirely possible that an angel could basically have a one-night stand, create a Nephilim, and then leave. And that's kind of what we start seeing in the mythologies, right? Heracles of the Greeks, right? Same thing with Alexander the Great, who himself claimed to be a god or a demigod and the son of Zeus, and said himself to be worshipped as a god because he had the Antichrist spirit. His mother flat out said, hey, Zeus came and knocked me up, and boom, we're done. That's why you should be worshiping my son. He's a god or half god. Leda and the Swan. You see all throughout these demigods being created by these one-night stands. That may be completely allowable. Now, it does seem as if there's some kind of other thing going on. So that's one. So Rob Skiba's theory is that there was a secondary incursion that created sort of these one-off Nephilim. Possible. I will not say it's impossible. But I think the clue, another thought is that one of the wives of Noah's sons had Nephilim genetics within her, and that essentially it expressed itself in a new tribe. Okay, I can't say no to that. I can't. It seems unlikely, because why would God go through everything that he did to destroy the Nephilim to allow the Nephilim to exist, right? It's like, but there's also a third theory, because there's a legend that Anak, who I just talked about, actually made a deal with Noah saying, hey, I won't torment you or your family or any humans anymore if you can save me through the flood. And the theory is, or the claim is, the story is that he actually rode, I know, but that he actually rode the ark through the storm and came out the other side so that the Nephilim was allowed to survive. Again, that one seems a little far-fetched for me. But the theory I tend to cling to, or I'm not cling to, but the one I tend to agree with the most, is that when Nimrod built his temple, right, the tower, there's even some argument that Nimrod himself did something that changed his own DNA. It says he became a Gibborim. Some people believe that they are saying that the Bible is actually saying Nimrod altered his own DNA to become a giant. I'm not going to say no. I think that there may be something to that. But very specifically, what I do think is that the tower itself, if you read into the Hebrew, the imagery wasn't that, oh, we're going to build a tower up and we're going to see God. It was to build a tower that would allow them to reach into the supernatural world. I think that's a very, very different mentality. I think it's a very different message. What we see all throughout the ancient world is, and this is going to be a little, I'm going to try and clean up the language as much as I can, but this is what it is. So I'm just hoping if you're younger, unfortunately, we're going to have that talk. Sex magic is yes, MH 1953, just like CERN. Only they did it through magic. The practice of sex magic is endemic in all of the ancient cultures. The idea that you, through a ritual, could have sexual relations with divine spirits was an aspect of it was even built into their rituals. The idea of temple prostitutes, by the time we get to the Iron Age, most of the temple prostitutes are there just to make money for the temple, right? The pagan priestesses. But originally, if you go back to the Sumerians and the Mesopotamians, what are they doing? What are they claiming? They are claiming that the priests and priestesses actually would, during these rituals, they would call upon the spirits to be possessed by these spirits, and then they would have sexual relations with people. It was supposed to be fertility rites. That's what we're told, right? Fertility rites. And that may be what they evolved into. But seriously, I gotta do something with that. Anyway, but these fertility rites, though, I think had another meaning. I think, it's my opinion, so don't bet on it, just hear me out. I think that all of this emanates from the Tower of Babel, that what Nimrod was trying to do was he trying to build a temple to sort of say, hey, I'm going to unify everyone's going to be beneath me, I'm the emperor, yes. But he was also trying to reach into Tartarus and bring the spirits out, even though the watchers themselves could not come over. We could reach into them, contact them, have their spirits possess a human being, through which that human being becomes a conduit, and the child comes out somewhat Nephilim. My argument for this comes from a couple of sources. The first one is Nimrod's own child, Gilgamesh. Some people will claim that Gilgamesh is Nimrod. I don't agree, because in the book of Gilgamesh, or the Epic of Gilgamesh, let me rephrase it, let me say it that way. Gilgamesh claims that his father built the walls around the city of Uruk, which is where he was. Well, that was Nimrod. We know Nimrod built that city, and so therefore the walls. So that means Gilgamesh couldn't be Nimrod. Secondly, he claims to be two-thirds divine. Well, even the Sumerians were really good at math. Even they know if you have one mother, one father, you can't be two-thirds anything. You can't be a third anything. It's halves, right? If you notice people talk about I'm half this or I'm a quarter this, well, everything's done by half because you have two parents. You only have two parents unless there was someone else involved. Remember, Nimrod was deified. I talk about this in several of the books. He was deified as a god. So that's your one. His mother, who would later be deified as a god, but his mother very specifically, was human. So he's half deified. Then we have that third person. The watcher that was conjured into one of the two, probably the woman, means that Gilgamesh had three parents. Two of them were considered gods, so he's 2/3 God. That's how we get there. And this seems far-fetched, but we do it today. We actually have, years ago, actually now, the first set of children with three parents graduated high school. This is happening back in the late 90s, early 2000s. They took, I think it was two fathers, one mother. They took the sperm from both males and the egg from one. They deliberately inserted the DNA from both males into it, so the child came out with basically three parents. Unfortunately, we don't know much about them, only that they are healthy. That's all we know. And they all graduated high school. So this is a real thing that can occur, and we can do it. Well, what could an angel do? Now, even if that angel is chained, he may not be able to escape, but if we can reach in and get him, then we've got something. Or that we could reach in and get a demon, right? The spirit of a Nephilim, and put it in a person. That could also possibly affect it. And we know that this is definitely the goal of those who practice Enochian magic. It is no myth. It is absolutely known that the idea of summoning a demon or Satan or a devil to become the wife, right, for some cult, and for them to be impregnated by that spirit, is a thing that happens. In fact, very famously, we have what's called the working of Babylon, where the guy who created the JPL laboratory and the guy who created Scientology, we'll talk about all that on a later show, were followers of Aleister Crowley, who rediscovered old Enochian magic, who summoned demons, the whole 9 yards. I've talked about him in the past. That's who he was. Well, he taught them what he called the working of Babylon, and that was the idea to create a star child. They performed that ritual, and they claimed that it didn't work. Some have argued otherwise, but let's just take them at their word that it didn't work. But the goal was to create a star child by impregnating this other woman with the seed, with a human seed that was infected somehow with these demons, or they didn't necessarily call them demons, but yeah, with this devil, this spirit, to manipulate and create this star child, what we would call Nephilim. So, but this is all stories. How do we take that next step? We need one more bit of evidence. And I would say it's actually found in the Bible itself, not in what's described, but in the names. I've already talked about how Og and Anak were of the Rephaim. These were giants. It's very specifically said, hey, the Rephites, the Nephilim, same thing. The Rephites are of the Nephilim. But how can we get them of the Nephilim? The Nephilim were all dead, all wiped out pre-flood. The word Rephaim is interesting because there's debate over where it actually comes from. What's the real root word? So I had to write this all down because, again, language, not my strong suit. So one theory, and this is the one you'll find most often, is that it comes from the Hebrew word that means to heal or to cure, like medicine. The other argument is it's from a Ugaritic word, Akkadian, meaning prince, right? We kind of get this connection of Akkad, right? They had the Anunnaki, or Anak rather, but they also have the Anunnaki. There's a connection that's been made there. Some people think it means prince. But there's a third option, and a lot of people think that it's got a lot of support amongst researchers lately, and I kind of agree with it. Is that it's actually the Rephaim or Rephites are a borrowed word from the Ugaritic, which is sort of an earlier version of Hebrew. A lot of things are taken from the Ugaritic, like Leviathan is actually a derivative of the name Lotan, which is sort of the earlier version of Tiamat. But we'll talk about that more. But it's the idea that again, things are taken from Akkadian, things are taken from the Ugaritic language. I tend to think the Ugaritic language is correct, and here's why. The Ugaritic version of that word Rephaim, in fact, there's even a thing called the Rephaim text, claims that that the Rephaim were these semi-divine ancestors that were dead, right? They were already dead. They were semi-divine, but they had died. We see later on the use of Rephaim in Isaiah and in Psalms as deceased, right? Like these are people who are long dead. Interestingly, in Isaiah, it shows up in Isaiah 14, where it talks about the dead kings, right? It says Sheol, or most English translations say hell, but it says Sheol is stirred up beneath you. When Lucifer, who's actually Antichrist, is killed and cast down, well, it says the Rephaim are waiting for him there, and they're the ones mocking him. Okay, that's an interesting use of words. Isaiah deliberately, several times, goes out of his way to use surrounding mythologies as a way of commenting on them, right? So he's using the word Rephaim, which, if the Ugaritic means these past semi-divine individuals who are already dead, then why name an entire living tribe of giants after them? Unless they're trying to tell us something. Where did they come from? Well, if Nimrod, he did do what I think he did, which is he created the tower to perform these sex magic rituals, where they either pulled the spirit of a watcher, or the spirit, or maybe even flat out a spirit of a demon, which is a dead Nephilim, to have a hand in that transaction, so to speak, then their children would be of the Nephilim, but something different. So that's why they choose the Rephites or the Rephaim, because the Ugaritic text said, yeah, the Rephaim are these semi-divine ancestors. They would have known. They're like, oh, you mean the Nephilim? You mean you're talking about the demons, the spirits that inhabit and possess people. So by calling them the Rephaim, these new giants, Rephaim, what are they saying? They're saying, okay, then there were these children that were created by Nimrod that were Nephilim. They do exist. That's how they came back. That's why we're calling them Rephaim. But then from the Rephaim, we get all these other people, because they go out and do other things. This is where it becomes important to us. What do these people do? Well, one group absolutely creates a tribe of giants. We know this because not only are they mentioned all throughout the Bible, but Sir Flanders Petrie, a man who literally wrote the history of Egypt, he described finding and discovering an entirely distinct culture in and around Egypt of giants. He said they averaged around 8 feet tall. They wore Semitic clothing. They had hooked noses. But he talks about them in his writings. You'll note no one followed up on it. Because again, around World War I, all this stuff gets shut down. Our ancestors knew about the giants. In fact, Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson both wrote about the giants here in North America, and we see them in records all throughout. The Spanish talk about finding tribes that were 8 feet tall. The American Indians, particularly the Plains Indians, they discuss it. South American Indians talk about the giants coming over on these big reed ships, right? Like, was again, we can talk about the raw and the whole boat thing, but later. But they came over on ships made of reeds, which we've proven over the last 40, 50 years is absolutely doable. In fact, if you left from Africa, you would end up in South America where they supposedly arrived. So, and you could do it in a reed ship, and these reeds were basically what you would make papyrus out of. So, absolutely possible. But they came here. So we know that these tribes existed. But then what else do they do? We know that there were several who went out and created entirely new empires. The Egyptian empires. Gilgamesh is a Nephilim. The Japanese or the Chinese claim that one of their earliest founders was the offspring of a dragon. And again, I think a lot of dragon imagery is absolutely connected to Satan. So on we go. We find that there's always these giants associated with the creation of some of these empires, if not most of them. Why? Because that's who created them. And this is where it becomes important to us. If I thought about this in advance, I would have pulled up an image. Most of us, again, most of y'all are probably found this channel through Texas from Port, so you're probably fairly familiar with some of the more esoteric aspects of the world today, including the elongated skulls that we find in Peru. Really, we find them all over the place, but they were still on display in Peru. And the thing is, yes, cradle head boarding is absolutely a thing, but there are certain skulls that have odd features. It's not just that they're elongated, but they have very distinctly, not just misshapen, but oddly placed things like the foramen magnum, which is where your spine meets up with your skull. It is, on some of these skulls, it is absolutely moved forward, probably to accommodate the extra weight of the skull. The orbital sockets are slightly larger. Their jaws are shaped a little weird, but the main thing is that some of them have this big lump in the forehead, but they only have one parietal plate. For those of you who don't know, our skull, the reason, when infants are born, they have that soft spot on the top of their head. Well, the reason for that is that the human skull has the front plate, the occipital plate here in the back, and then two parietal plates. Well, they all grow together, right, at some point, and you get what's called the sagittal suture. It's the top of your head, right? You can see it in x-rays. And if you look at a human skull, you'll see this weird little jagged line. That's the suture. That's where the bones have fused. See, when a human is born, they can't be fused, right? The head has to be able to sort of wiggle its way out. So it has to be. That's why you'll get you'll see a lot of babies come out with sort of like a cone head, and it flattens back out. Well, what's happened is the bones have actually had to kind of reposition themselves, so the child's head can come out. Well, over time, as they grow, these bones fuse together. And it leaves that sagittal suture, which looks like this. It's a little jagged line. There are some of these skulls that have that weird foramen magnum, the weird orbital eye sockets. They have no sagittal suture at all. Zero. That means they have one parietal plate, and there isn't, not just a human being that we're aware of. As near as I can tell, mammals in general don't have that. You can look at the skull of a dog, the skull of a mouse. It doesn't matter. I have yet to find a mammal that doesn't have a sagittal suture of some kind or another, because the parietal plates fuse together. That's what it means to be a mammal. But these skulls don't. Every time we find one of these weird elongated skulls, they are in positions of high authority. They are amongst the elite. So, and we have found some that were not born yet. I mean, these weren't just infants. They were fetuses. Their mother died, and so they got interned with them. These fetuses have elongated skulls, so it's not something that was done to them. It is an aspect of their genetics. Okay, why is that important? I cannot say with 100% because I can't find an MRI that shows the top of his skull. But we see with Tutankhamun, and we can then extrapolate from his from the images that his mother Akhenaten, his mother Nefertiti, and his brothers and sisters, they all had elongated skulls. And if we again, I have yet to find an MRI that shows the very top of Tutankhamun's skull, but as near as we can tell, his skull was elongated naturally. It wasn't cradle headboarded. He seems to have been born with that elongated skull, which means he was part of this Nephilim. He may have been part of this Nephilim bloodline. But why does he? But if you look at him, though, he looks very, very odd. In fact, people talk about how misshapen he is. Why? Well, a lot of people have pointed out interbreeding or inbreeding, not intra, but inner, or inbreeding. Well, this is where things get interesting. It is my theory that they realized pretty quick, these Nephilim, as they created these empires, that they were losing their Nephilim genetics really quickly. Because every time you had a kid with a human, your child was only half Nephilim, and you were only part Nephilim to begin with. So the Nephilim genetics were disappearing. Well, these Nephilim were teaching, they had some ability apparently to communicate with demons, with maybe even the Watchers themselves. We see this. That's why they sort of become these king priests, and they're worshipped as gods. My thought is they created this thing that we see all throughout, even as late as Middle Europe, where the aristocracy can only marry other aristocracy. Well, why? Well, initially, what are they doing? They're trying to preserve those Nephilim genetics. By the time, but it looks like Tutankhamun is probably one of the last of them alive because he's murdered. Then just normal humans fall in to replace him and his bloodlines. That sort of seems to be what happened in all of the empires. However, they retained all of the knowledge. So the Nephilim are recreated by Nimrod. Some set up tribes, some go to create empires. They do this sort of let's keep everything in the family kind of a deal, which creates and leads to these weird abnormalities that we see in Tutankhamun. He looks very effeminate. He just looks weird if you look at him. But they were trying to preserve the Nephilim genetics. So, how does any of that affect us today? The UFO phenomena. This is where it gets really important. The UFO phenomena has two aspects that I think absolutely speak to this event, or to this whole Rephaim situation. The first is that many abductions discuss the creation of these hybrid races, right? This hybrid alien human children. Many of them are said to be very odd looking. They have larger eyes. They have larger skulls. Sound familiar? So the theory is that they're being created for this purpose that's getting ready to occur in the future with the Antichrist. That they will be these kids, these half-breed humans are supposed to be their maybe they work with him, maybe they're part of his army, we don't know. But that's one thought. The other aspect is we see that, again, many of the grays that do seem to be tangible, right? What do they look like? Well, they have big heads and kind of scrawny bodies. Not entirely like what Tutankhamun looked like, obviously, but he was kind of going that way. It's entirely possible that at least some of these grays are this is what they became, this inbreeding, that they created these other versions. I'm 50-50 on that one, because I do think there's other aspects to explain them. But the main focus really needs to be on these hybrids. Why are they creating the hybrids? Is it just so they can have more Nephilim running around to help serve the Antichrist? Possibly. But I want to end this on this thought, because this is going to tie us right back into Revelation when we see up here in the beginning. The Antichrist and the false prophet are thrown at the end of Revelation. They are picked up and thrown into the lake of fire. They're the first inhabitants of true hell. The lake of fire, they are cast into it bodily. There's no book written, right? When a human being is judged, there are books of your life and your deeds, and you're weighed and measured, and they're like, hey, this is what everything you did. None of that occurs for those two. The Antichrist and the false prophet are picked up and chucked in there before Satan even gets there. Because again, Satan doesn't happen until much, much later, after the millennial kingdom. So why these two people, and why aren't they judged by by the books? Again, if you're a Christian, it is the blood of God of Jesus that saves you, right? That is our forgiveness. But the books are still open, right? We are still weighed and measured. Our lives are judged. It's just that Jesus intercedes on our behalf. But for those who sin, those who have rejected Jesus, that is absolutely the books that are used. Like, hey, here's your record. You didn't do any. These are your sins. This is all the things that you did. And I don't see anywhere Jesus saying that he's interceding for you, so you go to hell. But that doesn't happen for those two, Antichrist and the false prophet, thrown physically in there. Why? How? God is a God of legality. We've seen this. He absolutely does things by the book, so to speak. He's a God of order. He is a God of laws. He wouldn't do that unless they fell outside of the normal parameters, just like the Nephilim. Secondly, as we will discuss in greater detail, we know that the Antichrist spirit is a spirit. That's what he is. And that spirit has afflicted certain empires throughout history. We can actually track them. We'll talk about that more in the future. So if the Antichrist spirit is a spirit, and then the Antichrist is his manifestation, that's the Antichrist becoming human, then what happens? How does he become human? Unless there's a Nephilim body, unless there's something that it can inhabit and it can unite with it fully. That's what's happening. He can be thrown into the lake of fire because he's not actually human. He is the spirit of the Antichrist, or the Antichrist spirit is indwelling in a physical body that has no native soul. At least this is my theory. The reason we see people when they're possessed, they seem insane. Partly because the spirits themselves are insane, because they've been driven crazy from sensory deprivation. But it's also because the native soul is conflicting with the spirit that is now inhabiting it. Or spirits. Some can have over 1,000 spirits in them. But that the native soul, the one that's supposed to be there, they're fighting over control of that person. So this is why they come across as crazy, because the spirits are messing with their mind. But the Antichrist is in full control of the faculties, so that means there is nothing there for the Antichrist to fight against. He's there. The Antichrist spirit is inhabiting that body as the soul spirit within him. Well, that's only possible if there's a body that doesn't have a soul. How do we get that? We get the Nephilim. It is some form of Nephilim body that he is given that has no native spirit. They've somehow done something that allows the Antichrist spirit to just inhabit that body and be like, let's rock and roll. That's what's happening. That's why he and the false prophet can both be thrown into the lake of fire, because neither of them are actually human. They have human bodies, but it's their spirits that are of something else. They're something that was already judged a long time ago. This is how this affects us today. The great lie that's happening right now is that is the ancient astronaut theory. That's the lie. That is how the Antichrist will unify all religions and all cultures. That's going to be the thing, the mentality behind him, and that is also how he's going to get humanity to worship him. Remember, he stands in the Holy of Holies, basically claiming to be the thing to be worshipped there. How do you unify all these? How do you get Buddhism and Islam to match up? You can't, unless you say, hey, all the world's religions are based on encounters with a thing that y'all didn't really understand, right? That is the entire argument behind ancient astronaut theory. And so if he can pull this off, and he'll claim that that's what's happened. It's just everyone kind of got a little wrong. And he'll have aliens behind him, showing with him. He'll have hybrids that will interact with us. And again, these hybrids will be physical creatures. You can't unlike a demon, you can't cast them out. They belong on our side of the universe, right? They belong on our side of the veil. Unlike a demon that's over here, these creatures have every right to be here. That's the problem. So he's going to make the argument that he is, and again, the false prophet are representatives of this higher thing, and it's going to be ancient astronaut theory that they use to sell it. These hybrids are just reborn Rephaim, because what are they doing? They're reaching in, they're getting the spirits, they're commingling, and they're creating hybrids. The same way they did 4,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago, where they reached in and created the Rephaim. They're Rephaim. It's not the Nephilim that are being recreated. It's the Rephaim that are being recreated, because the Rephaim are not true Nephilim. They're sort of they're this watered down version. That's why the giants that we see later on throughout the scripture, again, Goliath, he's about 9.5 feet tall, in my opinion. Probably a little. He could be as tall as 11, but he's certainly not as tall as Og. Well, Og was sort of that first generation, right? He was, everyone else has been weakened. That's why we see 8 foot tall and 7.5 foot tall giants all across the Americas. We see those in Egypt. They were lesser than what they were pre-flood, because they weren't true Nephilim. They were just sort of this rebred version. And we see that with something like, say, the Auroch, right? The Auroch, for people who don't know, were originally these very large, very powerful bovines, right? Like, they were very hairy. We see drawings of them on cave paintings. And Julius Caesar talks, when you see these ancient stories about people slaying the bull, and it's like, well, why would that be a big deal? We kill and eat cows all the time. Well, aurochs were very, very large and very, very powerful. They were wild. They were untamed. So killing one of these things was a big deal. That's why it was sort of seen as an heroic act. Well, we bred them eventually into the modern cattle. Well, the Nazis, to sort of prove their point by being able to recreate the Aryan race, which I believe was an attempt to recreate the Nephilim, but we can talk about that later. He created the Auroch. He had them rebred, and he recreated them. It's like that's an Auroch, but they're smaller. Like their overall size was greatly reduced, but all the other features were there. Why? Because they could only recapture some of the genetics. They couldn't reclaim everything. That's what we see. The Rephaim were sort of that first generation, so they were taller, but they weren't 100%. But their offspring, they sort of settled about 7-8 feet tall, with a few of them being a little bit taller here and there. But it's because they couldn't recreate the purity of the Nephilim genetics that were pre-flood. They were just 2/3. The Rephaim were the 2/3 at best. So their kids, they came out a little weaker. They weren't as pure. So they got smaller. They got less intimidating. They became less powerful, and allowed them to be wiped out. I mean, that's where we get all these myths of Jack the Giant Slayer in Europe, right? Well, what was happening? They were running around killing giants because they didn't like them, because the giants were eating people, because they're cannibals, just like they were in the Book of Enoch. These creatures are cannibals very often. Some of them may not necessarily always eat people. It's not their only diet, but they became cannibals. It's something that seems to be built into them. And we see that even in there are stories of these aliens consuming humans. That's one of the things that they're doing. They're not just getting genetics. Some of them are being used as foodstuffs. I originally, when I came across this line of the UFO thing, I thought that was entirely weird. I'm like, that's got to be false. But the more you look into it, the more often you find out, yeah, this may be more of a thing than we realize. There's more and more of stories of people seeing, again, humans being consumed as food. It's a weird aspect of this particular phenomena, but it fits. It fits with what we know of the Nephilim. It fits with what we know of these creatures, both Nephilim and Rephaim. And it just is one more little thing that sort of lines up with what happened thousands of years ago is happening again. Why? Because of what's coming. Because of where we are in history. There is an Antichrist. They're the Antichrist. Not just an Antichrist, but the Antichrist is coming. And he is going to have influence over the rest of the world. His way is being prepared. And what happened back then is happening again today. And that these creatures, these new Rephaim, are what we're going to be contending with. And the problem with that is, it is unlike anything we've encountered for literally thousands of years. But it is something we're going to need to deal with. Now, I'm going to end right there. I don't know what we're going to talk about next week. We'll see how this next week goes. Because I've kind of said a lot about where we can go with this. I mean, really, that's about all there is. Unfortunately, there's not too much. Again, the point is not to don't be scared. Never fear these things. We just need to know where we are and what we are doing. We need to understand how they fit into the biblical narrative, right? What were they trying to do back then? They were trying to prevent the coming of the Messiah. What are they trying to do now? They're trying to prevent the coming of the Messiah. Will it work? Of course not. We see that in Revelation. But they're going to try. We just need to understand that. We need to understand that there is manipulation going on behind the scenes. That let me connect a lot of dots real quick. This week, just a few days ago, I'm going to get her name wrong only because I can't pronounce it. I've heard it said like 12 different ways. But Ghislaine Maxwell, or Ghislaine Maxwell, anyway, Jeffrey Epstein's right-hand confidant and assistant, was arrested by the FBI. People are claiming that she's going to name names. She was facilitating Epstein's work. But if you do a little digging into her background, and then when I first saw what people were claiming, like, that can't be a thing. Oh, it can. Like, it's even public information. She has an interesting history. Her family has an interesting history. Why? Well, if you watch the Out of Shadows documentary, it is very clear that there are a number of organizations of people that practice very evil things. That are ultimately satanic in nature. All of this, well, they just haven't released her mugshots yet, right? We don't know. And supposedly that she's not even in being held yet. They kept her at her home, at this home that she was staying at for a while. Sorry, Urban Grassman asked about Why don't we have her mugshot? And again, this is going to tie into what I'm saying. There's absolutely a ring of pedophiles, and it's not just that they all like all these important people like pedophilia. There's a ritual to it. There is absolutely Satanism occurring, and they target children. There's even some who have claimed that acts of cannibalism occur amongst some of the upper elite, that it's cannibalism. It is full-on worship of Satan. Heck, even Bohemian Grove, they have this giant statue of an owl, which is Moloch. And supposedly they have this mock ceremony where they take a toy baby, and sacrifice it. And it's supposed to be it's called the sacrifice of care. It's like, well, it's not really a thing. It's just something we do. Let's, for a moment, entertain the idea that this is not really a child that they're sacrificing, but is a baby doll. It's just it's all just for show. Why in the world would you participate in that? Wouldn't you look at that and say, this is bizarre. This is not normal behavior. Why would I dress like a druid in front of a giant owl statue and burn some toy baby? Because it's about indoctrination. What they are doing is they are using the elites, bringing them into a very evil mindset. This is a mindset that goes all the way back to the original empires. What were the Nephilim doing? They were corrupting our genetics, yes. But more importantly, they were corrupting our souls. They were corrupting our cultures. They were bringing evil into it. And that evil has maintained itself throughout the centuries. It is us who've been doing it. All that's happening now is this thing is being reintroduced, has been reintroduced, and is going quite heavily, quite strongly. We saw this in Eisenhower's speech, right? His famous last speech where he talks about, everyone focuses on the line about the military-industrial complex. I focus on the first part, where he says that we need an engaged and educated citizenry. Why? Because he understood what was coming. He knew what was happening. We have become disengaged. We are not well educated. We have, even people who come out of Harvard, what we've become is indoctrinated. We don't see what's right in front of us. And these people are allowed to do and continue with their evil. It's all coming to a head. The end is coming, and that's fine, because it's not the end. It's the end of this world's system. Let me jump ahead for the book of Revelation, for that study. We win, and it gets better. That's the thing that everyone focuses on the bad things that happen in the book of Revelation. You should focus at the climax, which is Jesus coming and fixing everything. He eliminates corruption. He eliminates all of this evil, so that for 1,000 years, humanity lives in peace and prosperity. We don't have to worry about the things that we're seeing today. It goes away. And that even greater, we live in paradise, which is the New Jerusalem, with God forever. There's an end to injustice coming. That's why this is all happening, because the forces of evil know that their time is short, and they're preparing. All they want to do is take the most people with them that they can. They know I think on some level, many of them know they can't win, but like so many people out of spite, they just want to take as many people with them. That's it. Which is why your job is not to let them. Your job is to save as many as we can. We have to keep that focus. It is about the gospel. And the gospel must be spread through word and through deed. Speak the truth. Love your neighbor. I wish evil would surrender as well, but it's not. Evil must be destroyed and it must be beaten. But it's done but it's done by speaking truth and loving your neighbor. If you love God, then you'll love to speak the truth. If you love God, you will love your neighbor and you will do what is necessary to love them. If that means meeting physical needs to speak with them, that's what you do. If it means helping them, that's what you do. I don't know what that person that you're sent to looks like or what their situation is, but you were sent to them, and the Holy Spirit will tell you what you need to do. Speak the truth. Love your neighbor. That's all you got to do. And it'll work. Because every single one of us is a king and a priest in a kingdom that's yet to come, but that lives in the hearts and minds of everyone who believes in it. But the kingdom is coming. Have no doubt on that. It will physically be here. And it will, and then we won't have to worry about people like Ghislaine Maxwell or Ghislaine Maxwell or Epstein or any of it ever again. There will be righteousness and there will be peace. That is worth fighting for. I will see y'all Thursday. For those of you who watch Texas Front Porch, I'll see you tomorrow. Be good, people.